Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Angela and I'm an Angelic Arcturian. Thanks for joining me once again. And today, you guys, I want to talk about understanding karmic relationships and why we have them and how we can learn the lessons they're meant to teach us and end our karmic suffering sooner rather than later. So as always, it usually comes down to having an expanded awareness on what karmic relationships are and the purpose that they play in our lives, so we can begin to see ourselves as in control of our experience rather than being controlled by our experience. And when we are unconscious, we are typically being controlled by our experience rather than controlling the experience itself. And so that's what higher consciousness is all about, is learning how to take control of our lives in a way that empowers us rather than disempowers us. So with that being said, let's get into it. So what is a karmic contract? A karmic contract is essentially a contract between two different souls to play out a duality existence in the third dimension, where these two souls will be strongly attracted to each other or strongly bonded in some way, but just won't be able to get along. It will be, your greatest nemesis, your greatest enemies, your most difficult family members, the people that challenge you on a regular basis that you have a difficult time dealing with. Those are all people that you have karmic contracts with. So when we incarnate into the matrix, it's important to understand that when we come in, we know that we're coming into suffering. And we even choose our own suffering, and we choose the people around us that are going to help us grow through that suffering, even if they themselves are causing suffering to us. So we're well aware of this when we come in. We contract this stuff before we come in. So if we choose to have a difficult parent or partner, or we end up in repeating patterns, that's all based around karma. And so it's kind of complicated because it can have a lot to do with past lifetimes, or it can have to do with just something that we want to overcome in a current lifetime. So, we develop these contracts in order to grow, essentially. And so they're going to be very challenging for us until we learn the lesson that we're supposed to learn from them. So in the instance of, say, a lifetime where I want to cultivate greater empathy and compassion, I would choose karmic partners and people that were going to challenge me in the opposite way, which would mean they would not offer to me empathy or compassion. And so I would attain greater awareness of empathy and compassion by experiencing the lack of it. So say you incarnate and with a contract with a difficult parent, and maybe this parent is abusive and an alcoholic, and so you spend your entire childhood dealing with this parent. What's going to happen is you're going to have more compassion and empathy for other people who've also experienced, the alcoholic parent, as well as at a later point being able to develop compassion and empathy for the alcoholic parent. But a lot of times what happens with us is we get stuck in our own trauma patterns, and this is what makes it difficult for us to escape these karmic cycles and karmic contracts with people. Is what can happen to a lot of people is that we get stuck in victimhood and victim consciousness, and when we do this, the pattern will repeat. So if I'm dealing with the alcoholic parent and I end up in a deep state of victim consciousness as a result of that, which usually happens, and that's the suffering that we endure, it puts us in this state of trauma and victim consciousness. And then our job, our karmic job, is to work through the trauma and to overcome it, and to see that the alcoholic parent's selfishness wasn't a direct reflection of my own self-worth, but it was an opportunity for me to see through that dualistic lens how I can be more compassionate, how I can be more present, how I can be less selfish. And so by learning from their lack of such, it creates within us more of that dynamics, as long as we don't get stuck in the victim mindset for too long. I mean, we're going to go there for a while because we need to endure that suffering, but at some point we're going to reach a point where we say, you know, I'm going to work through this trauma, and this is what the spiritual path is all about. I'm going to work through this trauma of my alcoholic parent and how I internalized their behavior as something wrong with me, or, you know, caused me trauma and wounding through their behavior. And when we begin to work through that, we begin to cultivate forgiveness and compassion and empathy, which is the goal. I mean, that's what we want to do. So the lesson is in the healing from it. And what happens is people can get stuck in the victim state and not do the healing. And when we do that, we just repeat the same karmic patterns over and over again, and not always with the same person. The trauma could start with the alcoholic parent, and then as we get deeper and deeper into our trauma and our victim consciousness, then we take on a partner that has similar behaviors and dynamics, and so the pattern will repeat through that partner, and then we may get divorced from them, and our kid may start developing this type of behavior, and we go through the dynamic with them, each time adding to the trauma, adding to the victim consciousness, adding to the wounding. And the reason for this is so that you're eventually going to reach a point of suffering within that you have no choice but to really heal it and work through it. Not everybody does. Some people die as complete victims to their experience, and that's okay. But what you want to do is learn to overcome it and find healing from the experience, and through that healing is where the gold is. That's where the pot of gold is at the end of the rainbow, and that's when you really begin to overcome your karma. So when you look at your relationships, the ones that challenge you the most, like for me, I still have a narcissist in my life that challenges me on a daily basis, but I don't hold myself as a victim to the narcissist anymore. Now when I have to deal with a narcissist, I use the narcissist as practice. Can I stay calm? Can I stay grounded? Can I not emotionally react? Can I have emotional control in this situation? And every time I'm faced with a narcissist, I use them as an exercise to practice more emotional control and stability and groundedness. And so we can't have that perspective when we're stuck in the throes of victim consciousness. So once we begin to understand the nature of karmic relationships and why we have them, it's easier to have the perspective of what is this trying to teach me, rather than the victim consciousness of this person's abusing me, this person's hurting me, this person's not meeting my emotional needs. Instead, let's ask ourselves, what is this trying to teach me? And when we do that, we can pull ourselves out of that victim consciousness, and we really begin to have some control over our experience, because we have the perspective to see the reasons for it. And there's always a reason for our suffering. There is no suffering done in vain. There's always a reason for it. But how long we suffer in a particular dynamic is completely up to us. The important thing to remember here is not to sink into victimhood and victim consciousness. It's hard to do, I know. I spent years and years of my life as a victim, and I still fall into victim consciousness sometimes. It's not an easy thing to overcome, but it's something that we need to be conscious and aware about. So when it comes to karmic relationships, it's always about learning, it's always about growth. And your karmic relationships are the difficult relationships in your life, the ones that challenge you, the ones that piss you off, the ones that make you want to commit murder. Those are your karmics, and those all have a lesson to teach you. So learn the lesson and overcome. And part of overcoming as well, if you really want to dissolve the karma with this person, say someone did you really dirty and you just want them out of your life forever. You don't want any karmic connection to them at all. As long as you're holding on to resentment, anger, the need for revenge, all of that kind of stuff, then you still have karmic tentacles attached to that person. Even if you understand the lesson you're supposed to learn from them, the second part of that is being able to find forgiveness for them. So when you still have these tentacles intertwined energetically into this person in this situation, because there's negative emotions there, anger and the need and desire for revenge and things like that, you're still keeping that connection going. And even that can carry on into another life, but not always. It depends on how hard and how strong you're really holding on to that resentment. But when we're able to find forgiveness for the people that hurt us, and we're able to get the perspective that a lot of people don't hurt other people intentionally. There are people out there who do, but for the most part, most people unintentionally hurt others through their own unconsciousness. So it's not technically really their fault. They just lack the awareness and consciousness to understand how their actions affect others. And that could be a karmic contract that they are working out in this life, is understanding how their actions affect others and the cause and effect from that. And you could just be somebody who was collateral damage in that learning process for that person. So that person may not have intentionally hurt me at all, but I may hold on to that resentment for the rest of my life and just want revenge and be hateful and resentful towards that person. And so part of getting over that is kind of understanding that everyone's on their own level of consciousness, learning their own lessons. And it's not always someone's evil agenda out to get you that causes people to hurt you. A lot of times it can be their trauma, and it can just be their own lack of self-awareness and unconsciousness. So that really helps us to be able to find forgiveness for people when we can just see them simply as like a child. We don't get angry at a child for spilling milk. We understand that the child spilled the milk unintentionally, or that the child just doesn't quite understand the dynamic at play. We don't get angry and want to murder the child. And so we have to see people on lower levels of consciousness through that same lens. They just don't have the awareness required to meet your needs, and that is okay. So when it comes to working out these karmic lessons through these karmic relationships with other people, being able to have higher perspectives on consciousness really does help. And also when we begin to work through our own traumas and our own victimization and our own wounding, that's also going to give us a greater perspective and a greater compassion and empathy for others that are in the midst of their own suffering, because we all suffer on this planet. Nobody escapes it, no matter what it may look like. Everyone suffers in their own unique way. And so it all goes together, it all fits together so that we can all evolve our consciousness together. Finding forgiveness is the key here to completely dissolving the karma between you and another, and healing the trauma and the wounding and learning the lesson and getting the growth from the experience, which you're not going to get if you're stuck in victimhood and victim consciousness. So just be aware of that, and take a look at your most challenging relationships, whether it's your boss, your daughter, your mom, whoever it is in your life that's very difficult for you, and see if you can see what it is that you're supposed to learn, what this challenging dynamic is trying to teach you so that you can evolve and grow through it instead of being a victim of it. And at the end of the day, we ultimately want to get to the place of forgiveness and being able to release it and let it go, and then the karma is dissolved between you and that person forever, at least as far as you are concerned. How they handle it is their own business and their own karma, but your side of the street is clean as soon as you find forgiveness for that person. So if you really hate them and you really want them out of your life, learn how to forgive them genuinely. I don't mean just say it, but genuinely do it. And so this is how we work through karma and karmic relationships, and how we get the fastest growth in the shortest amount of time is to be able to have conscious awareness of how these dynamics work. So I hope that gives you a perspective and maybe a better outlook on these difficult relationships. And I think I will just see you guys next time.